The British Seafarer, a history in 26 parts. Programme 23, Jutland. This programme tells the story of the naval battle that was both climax and anticlimax of the age of the great steel battleship. It presents that experience in the words of some of those who lived through it, with a commentary from the programme consultant, Peter Nailor, Professor of History, Royal Naval College, Greenwich.
In 1914, the Dreadnought Navy had an image in the public imagination which was larger than life to a legendary degree.
Both the young and the aged in the country had been brought up in the belief that our navy was not only invulnerable, but as in the old days, would sink and destroy any enemy's fleet that might be encountered on the high seas.
The Great War had begun with the British fleet heading north to its war bases in an atmosphere as impressive as any poet of the Empire could have wished.
We may now picture this great fleet steaming slowly out of Portland Harbour, squadron by squadron. Scores of gigantic castles of steel wending their way across the misty, shining sea, bearing with them into the broad waters of the north the safeguard of considerable affairs.
As long as the battleships of the German high seas fleet were intact, in port, on the other side of the North Sea, the battleships of the British Grand Fleet must wait and watch for them, hoping for the chance of a great battle in which to destroy them. The Commander-in-Chief, Admiral Jellicoe, knew this would not be easy.
My knowledge of the German fleet had convinced me that in materiel, the Germans were ahead of us.
David Beatty, the admiral commanding the battlecruiser squadrons, was often regarded as a more dashing character than the cautious and painstaking Jellicoe.
Beatty I put down as the second Lord Nelson, you know. I admired him, I always did. He had us all on board from the destroyers, and he said, of course, you know what you're there for, he said. As soon as the German fleet comes out again, he said, I shall throw you straight at them, see? So he said, you got to know what you're expecting before long, see? Some of the married men was kicking up and disturbing about it. You ought to be shot and all that, you know, see?
Scapa Flow and Rosyth were both remote and desolate. The chief problem was to maintain morale and efficiency while patiently waiting.
The midshipmen of the gunroom in the Lion, chafing at their captivity, composed this parody on a well-known hymn. We hate this bloody war, it gives us all the blight. We cannot go ashore, and yet we cannot fight.
Well, I think it was rather dull in a way. And after the war, we used to sing, you know, to some of them, swinging round the buoy, swinging round the buoy, you know, see? Because they didn't put the sea so often as we did. But what I think about it was that they were kept pretty busy if they wasn't doing physical drill. They was doing something else.
The men treated the war as being in the day's work and looked forward eagerly to the time when the enemy would give them the opportunity for which they were waiting and for which they kept themselves thoroughly efficient and fit.
Both the young and the aged in the country expected, looked for, even longed for the coming battle, which would bring to the country once more laurels like those Nelson had so proudly placed on her head. Our people knew nothing of the vast difference that had come over naval tactics.
It was not until the early months of 1916 that the likelihood of the great Dreadnought battle began to build up.
During the month of May, there was a feeling of great tension. The ship's companies knew that in recent sweeps they had once or twice narrowly missed an encounter with the high seas fleet.
When you pass for able seamen, you can then select whether you want to be in the torpedo branch or the seaman gunner branch. So I said I'd be going for seaman gunner, you see, and the writer said, well, he says, you're going down, next one to go down. I says, righto. And I can remember my relief coming, you know, because they have to send a relief to take your place. I was a sight setter, actually. And I can remember turning my duties over to him. Literally, in 4 days' time he was going to be in Kingdom Come, and
It was on the afternoon of May the 30th that Sir David Beatty received orders to proceed to sea. A big movement of the German fleet was believed to be imminent.
We could all sense it was more than just an ordinary sweep, because not only were the battle cruisers there, all 6 or 8 of us, but we'd been joined by the 5th Battle Squadron, the very magnificent Queen Elizabeth class. We were much more powerful fleet than usual left the force. We knew there was something rather big on hand.
The Lions officers were playing an important cricket match against the ladies of Edinburgh, while others played tennis. In the middle of the afternoon, when Beatty's Chief of Staff, Captain Bentinck, was doing his best to keep his wicket intact against some pretty bowling by the girls, up went the recall and everybody hastened back to the ship.
We did discover later that the Admiralty itself, who were able, with a certain amount of wireless direction finding, to spot the movement of the ships and realize that there was quite a large number of German ships moving in keel and evidently making for sea. And in the meantime, the Grand Fleet up in Scarborough Flow were getting up steam like mad to come out. They unfortunately didn't have the same speed as the battle cruisers.
We were to proceed to rendezvous with the battle fleet, which was also to leave Scapa that day. We sailed that evening. May the 31st broke fine, calm and clear, with considerable visibility. We steamed towards our rendezvous, zigzagging as usual.
Twelve men go down on watch. 2 of them have to go up in the bunker, and the rest down below. That is 6 men on the boiler, that's 6 boilers, and 4 men trimming coal, dragging coal from the bunker to feed all them boilers. I've got 4 hours of it. And they're shoveling away as the coal goes down, so they keep on filling, keeping the chute full up. And the other 4 men are drawing away all the time from the bottom. That's 4 hours they do, like that. Just a dim light, one light. And the coal dust and that that's flying around. I mean, say you can't see very well, but you judge your chute, you see?
Behind Beatty's battlecruiser squadron and its supporting battleships came the Grand Fleet itself under Jellicoe, the Dreadnought Navy.
Excited, but I wasn't. Not a bit. It's hard to express which is what we did feel like. A sort of tense feeling, waiting for the unknown to happen and not quite knowing what to expect.
The battle fleets themselves are now approaching each other at a closing speed of over 35 miles an hour, and with every minute we enter the kingdom at once of the decisive and of the unknown. The supreme moment on which all the thought and efforts of the British and German admiralties had been for many years concentrated was now at hand. But nothing like this particular event had ever happened before, and nothing like it was ever to happen again. Jellicoe knew that a complete victory would not improve decisively an already favorable naval situation, and that a total defeat would lose the war.
At 3 o'clock, About 29,000 yards I spotted on the horizon a mass of ships, I should say between 30 and 40, because you could only count them in sticks and smoke. But I knew they were ships and enemy ships by the stigmatizer that I had on my rangefinder.
The first encounter between Beattie's battle cruisers and those of the Germans began almost accidentally.
We were the starboard van for Beattie, within visual signal distance of him on his starboard bow. And then we saw this merchantman hove to with a German destroyer boarding her, or attempting to board her. And when we got nearer this German destroyer, it was part of a flotilla, and that was part of a squadron, and that was part of the German high sea fleet. So we told Mr. Beattie, and he got Mr. Jellicoe down. Jellicoe fired the first shot, and the only casualty we had was the captain of the head. The funny thing, we had a shot. We were very lightly armoured, very lightly. And the shot went through the starboard forecastle, through the head, and it hit the top chute, and this captain of the head was the ship's tailor. And the top chute was sacrosanct to his machine. It was blocked off, and he did his doing in the top chute, you see. Well, he went for Burton.
I was sitting on the bread board with a stoker named McNally, and sitting on the bread board at the end of the table, I had a basin of tea, and Sticky Blue come running through blowing his bugle, and I said to Mac, I said, that sounds like action. So he says, action? No, he said, the G on the end. I said, it's not, you know. Anyway, he said to me, I don't think so. I said, I know it is, and I got the first dog watch down below. Anyway, he says, oh, well, away we go. Drink your tea up.
In the afternoon of Jutland, it was very misty. Dale with a low ceiling that seemed to come down and touch the water.
Beattie, who was rapidly closing Hipper, formed his battle cruisers in line of battle. The western horizon was clear, so to the enemy the British ships were sharply silhouetted against a blue sky.
It was a most majestic spectacle. It was stimulating. These 6 dark grey giants coming, approaching. It was like fate itself. These 6 ships, they were at first proceeding in 2 columns, and then they formed a line ahead, and it was like a herd of prehistoric monsters. They closed in on one another with very slow movements. It was spectre-like. It was irresistible.
From the Lion's Bridge, the dim outline of the German ships could be seen, but no details could be fixed out.
My range receiver on the bridge showed 20,000 yards. I was on the compass platform with my navigator, Commander Arthur Strutt, and my small staff. Beattie was on his bridge below. I sent a message to Seymour, telling him to advise Beattie that the range was closing rapidly and that we ought almost at once to be opening fire. 18,000 yards. I told Longhurst, the gunnery lieutenant, to be ready to open fire instantly.
As soon as we got into battle stations, about 19,500, the Germans opened up. They fired the first shot, and it went just over the Princess Royal, about 50 yards. I said to the director gunner, I says, "Course, that was a good shot, wasn't it?" He says, "Yeah, it was."
So I went down F Stoke, I was still down F Stoke, and went down below, relieved Thompson on the boiler, number 6 boiler I was on, because I was first class stoker then, see. And by golly, we wasn't down there 2 minutes. Wham, wham. I know, this is it, here we go.
first thing I saw in the distance was a marvellous smoke screen by the Germans. It was really wonderful. But unfortunately, one of their ships was not covered at the end of the line. And within seconds, many ships put their full salvos on as it went over the water. It was just like a tin can. It was too much to take in. But I've never seen so many ships in one area in my life before, ever since. And there was, of course, torpedoes. You could see the track of torpedoes passing to and from, and the flashes of the guns, and the noise. The whole thing, to me, if I could put it in these words, was like 100 thunderstorms run into one another and all going on.
All round us, huge columns of water, higher than the funnels, were being thrown up as the enemy shells plunged into the sea. Occasionally, above the noise of battle, we heard the ominous hum of a shell fragment and caught a glimpse of polished steel as it flashed past the bridge.
The Lion was hit several times, but we seemed also to be hitting the Lutzer, and were going along joyfully when at 4 p.m. my yeoman of signals saw and reported the Indefatigable, Captain Gerald Sarvey, blow up.
The message came through that the flags was entangled round the mast. Somebody must go up. So I took my sea boots off, climbed out the foretop, went up the Jacob's ladder, right to the very top. I unfurled the flag, and I sat on the wireless yard, looking around, when a shell or something hit the magazines. There was a terrific explosion. The guns went up in the air just like matchsticks, 12-inch guns they were. And within half a minute, she was gone. I was thrown, I was 180 foot up, you understand, and I was thrown well clear of the ship. Otherwise, I would have been sucked under. When I came up, there was another fellow there named Green, Jimmy Green, I think it was. And we swam over, we got a piece of wood. He was on one end, I was on the other end. And a couple of minutes afterwards, some shells come over. Jimmy was minus his head. He went, so I was left on my lonesome.
By 4 o'clock, the range had come down to 14,000 yards, and we were at close grip with the enemy. His fire was phenomenally accurate, and we were being hit frequently. I glanced aft over the upper deck and saw one of our boats in the booms going up in a cloud of splinters.
I heard a resounding clank behind me. I saw a large flame spring up from Q turret, which was some 100 feet above the bridge. The armoured roof of Q turret had gone up in the air and fallen with a crash on the upper deck.
A blood-stained sergeant of Marines appeared on the Admiral's bridge. He was hatless, his clothes were burnt, and he seemed to be dazed. I asked him what was the matter. In a tired voice he replied, "Q turret has gone, sir. All the crew are killed, and we have flooded the magazines."
In Q turret, a shell come down there, and it was Major Harvey that saved the ship because he got the VC for it. He had 2 legs blown off, you know, and he flooded the magazine and saved the ship. But by golly, that side of me, between that bulkhead and that crowd that was down there, was a load killed, some hanging on the ladder where they were burnt. A parson was killed down there, and messengers, and had to flood another part and drowned some stokers down there that was messengers. They couldn't get them out quick enough, it just drowned them.
At 25 minutes past 4, soon after we had resumed our position ahead of the Princess Royal, the third ship in the line, the Queen Mary, Captain Price, blew up, exactly as had the Indefatigable. I was standing beside David Peake, and we both turned round in time to see the unpleasant spectacle. The thought of our many friends in her flashed through my mind. Beatty turned to me and said, "There seems to be something wrong with our bloody ships today."
Yeah, well, Giddy said to me, Cock, he says, go up and see if you can get any water out the tank, because they were drinking the water what was feeding the boilers. I said, all right. So I goes up with this Dixie, and I found a tank and it was semi-darkness because we had secondary lighting going. That was the oil lamps. Turned the tap on, hooked the Dixie on, started to fill the water up. All of a sudden I heard a groan. And I looked, and it's Douglas Priest laying on the table with a lump out of its jaw and what have you, and trying to ask for water. I tried to get him some water down him, but it just simply run out of him onto his chest. And then on the other table there was DeCosta, Stoker DeCosta, with no legs. He laid on the table. Anyway, I got back down below, and they said, what's it like? Oh, I said, it's horrible.
It was shortly after the Queen Mary's loss that Rear Admiral William Goodenough reported battleships in sight.
This was it. Beatty's pursuit of the German battle cruisers had led him into the jaws of the whole German high seas fleet coming up behind.
Almost immediately a forest of masts and funnels appeared on the southern horizon where the visibility appeared to be clear. Without hesitation, Beatty swung his battle cruisers round to a northerly course and settled down at full speed close to Commander-in-Chief by the quickest route.
Now Beatty in turn was leading the Germans into the jaws of the British Grand Fleet under Jellicoe.
The consideration present in my mind was the danger involved in leaving too much to chance in a fleet action, because our fleet was the one and only factor that was vital to the existence of the Empire, as indeed to the Allied cause.
When we sighted our battle fleet, we steered to take our position ahead of their van on the course to which they intended to deploy.
So, at 6:16 p.m., a signal was made to the battle fleet to form line of battle on the port wing column, on a course southeast by east, it being assumed that the course of the enemy was approximately the same as that of our battle cruisers.
And you couldn't see much. If you got within 4 or 5 miles of a ship, well, I saw several go up, but we didn't know who they were, whether they were ours or whether they were the Germans.
The visibility was very variable. However, at 7:15 p.m., in a temporary clear channel through the mist, good ranges of 15,000 yards were obtained of a battleship, at which 4 salvos were fired by the Iron Duke before this target was again hidden by smoke and mist.
At that exciting moment, I saw the first cruiser squadron, led by the Defence, the flagship of Sir Robert de Butler, leading from port to starboard across my bows.
The Warrior was one of these old cruisers, Warrior, Defence and Black Prince, under the command of Admiral Sir Keith Arbuthnot, who was famous when younger for the Nelson Touch. And his instructions, I believe, had been to keep around on the outskirts of the battle, not get too close to the enemy's heavy stuff, because they were very old ships built in the 1890s, and pick up stragglers or survivors. But Nelson Touch doesn't allow for hanging around on the outskirts of a battle, so he sailed in to get a bit closer. And I heard the captain say, he said, "My heavens," he said, "he's put up Nelson's signal, engage more closely." And at that moment the mist lifted, and unfortunately there was about 2 or 3 large German battle cruisers, only a matter of few thousand yards away, and they simply let the poor old Defence, Black Prince and Warrior have the lot.
You know, in a way, it almost became watching a film, if you understand what I mean. So much was going on that you didn't get time to think of yourself or anything. You'll probably see a ship being shelled over there. You say, poor devil, poor devil. At the same moment, you get a couple of bricks alongside you. You see. But before you could think about those, something else was happening over there. There was so much going on. And you not knowing the general strategy, you felt how small you were.
Warrior went clean out of control, obviously with a rudder jammed hard over, and started going round in circles. Our engine room was in a frightful state. Everybody in the engine room was killed with this terrific salvos she'd got. Guns pointing up in the air, funnels hanging over the side. She had a terrible mess. But they couldn't stop her because there was nobody in the engine room to stop her, and just for the time being they couldn't get down to the engine room. Unfortunately, the rudder was jammed hard over. Casualties were pretty bad aboard her at the time.
We now naturally expected, however, that the two battle fleets would be locked in close grip, and that a tremendous gunnery duel was imminent. This, of course, did not happen.
I was traveling in a train with two sailors that was in the Jellicoe ship, and one of these ABs said, "We fired 8 rounds in that battle." Another AB said, "We never fired 1 round."
Marvellous sight to see these battleships coming, flying full speed, you know, and the guns firing. And the Invincible blew up right inside us nearly. And of course, there was only about 6 saved from her.
The 3rd Battle Cruiser Squadron, Invincible, Indomitable and Inflexible, here joined the fray, coming down from the north. And almost immediately, the Invincible, my old Invincible, with one of the finest of admirals on board, Hood, blew up about 6:30. I first saw the Crimson Gouge when it was some 100 feet high, by perhaps 200 broad. It rose contemptuously, leisurely, at its top, a great balk of timber, or piece of plating, or something, to a total height of some 300 or 400 feet, about as high as the Forth Bridge cantilevers. Then the red faded out, and there remained blackness below, and a new-formed white billowy cloud above. 18 minutes later, a snow shower of paper leaves fell on us from her. She blew up at 6:32, the leaves fell at 6:50. As the black pall drifted away, we saw her 2 ends leaning towards one another, standing on their broken midship sections in some 30 fathoms of water, like some silly fancy picture.
Well, of course, after that, there was other ships had already gone, many crippled. And when we steamed to the patch, the main patch, there was the men on rafts, bits of wood, bravely cheering, waving. And there was a smell of cordite, a smell of gas from shells, and also burnt bodies. But unless you're ordered to stop, as you may know, you don't stop to pick up survivors, which is another terrible feeling. And going through this, what I might call the center of all the destruction, left me with a very nasty feeling inside. I wouldn't say it was a case of being scared, but the thought of all that in the water, 1,000 men going down at one go, gave me a queer feeling.
There was a terrific explosion, and twin torpedoes struck us on the starboard side, and it simply lifted that ship like a ball and bounced her up and down, just like a rubber ball would be in the water. My action station, there was first aid, and we were down in one of the flats, and we felt the ship gradually going further over and over.
The enemy turned sharply away into the mist, and some survivors of the Invincible on a raft cheered the line as she swept past.
Anyhow, we had a Surgeon Lieutenant Commander there who was in charge of the first aid station, and of course everybody's faces turned pale. We wondered whether she'd gone over altogether, and we were going to be kept, we were going to be drowned in this little compartment. Anyhow, he said that, look, he said, there'll be no VCs run on this station. You all remain who you are. And I think that calmed everybody down. Matter of fact, he sat on the companionway, the ladder that led out, and refused to let anybody out. Not that anybody did attempt.
It was a weird and wonderful business. You only saw the square mile you were in, but I've never seen anything so quick. is the way a destroyer would appear, would fire a torpedo, and would go up in a sheet of flame and there'd be no destroyer. Everything was at super speed. They'd become overwhelmed by enemy fire. Where you look where the patch was, there was just a little bit of troubled water, no destroyer. And there was a couple hundred men, I suppose.
The light was now in our favour, and whenever German ships were sighted, we at once engaged them, with hardly any return of fire. We would see our salvos straddle them, when they would put up a smoke screen and turn away under cover. Unfortunately, darkness was now falling.
The Warrior gave a nasty sort of shudder. It just looked as she was just going to sink. It was unmistakable, apart from pulling us with her. Just for a moment, there was that slight look on all those chaps' faces. And keep in mind, they had an awful hammering. I mean, the scuppers were running with blood and a lot of casualties. And there might have been a panic. The captain just signalled the bugler. He blew the still. One just took to the still. Every man Jack stood to attention. Then they carried on, in a very orderly manner.
Jellicoe had just missed his Trafalgar, but only just. There was a desperate moment for the Germans when a wall of fire from almost the whole British fleet looked as if it would destroy them. But an heroic counter-attack by their battle cruisers and destroyers and their skill in manoeuvre were just enough to make possible an escape into the darkness. Jellicoe decided to break off the main fleet action and shadow the enemy in order to destroy him the next day. But a fierce and confused battle of the lighter ships went on during the night.
I saw big ships coming very nearly in the opposite direction, curiously enough. I attacked at once, thinking it was a single ship. I hadn't gone very far when I realized that my little destroyer was taking on a division of 4 German battleships. They switched on their searchlights and they got us at once. We opened fire. The torpedoes were fired. I couldn't say if they hit their mark. You couldn't see anything when the searchlights are on you. Every shot of the Germans, every gun that was fired, I think, hit us for about 3 minutes. And then they switched off. Curiously, when they switched off their gunfire, there was a comparative hush of everything. Quite still, no noise. I'd been by this time hit myself quite badly, but I managed to stagger aft. The whole thing was in a shot to pieces, you might say.
And suddenly a huge explosion took place in the 3rd German ship. And with a deafening noise and shock, she seemed to first of all open out, and then close together, and then to go. The pre-Dreadnought Pommern vanished from sight in a fireball with all her crew. And in the silence that followed, a voice on our bridge was heard to say, "Pity the poor devils. They ain't drawn their money's worth."
Well, I think about 50 men were left when the ship went down, all quite calm and collected, swimming, paddling about. Only lifebelts, no more, no boats or rafts. They were all pulverized. One by one, the men dropped off. They didn't seem to suffer. They seemed to get numbed in the cold water, just lay back and went to sleep.
We got our packet at night time. Oh, my God. One salvo made us like a pepper box. We lost just a third of our seamen. Just a third of our seamen. God, washed out the searchlight screw. Well, of course, we made a bloomer there. I feel sure we did. We switched on our searchlights and they were ready for us. So every searchlight go bang. They put every searchlight out in the ship. My little messenger boy was there. My God. I don't know. I give some people medals as big as frying pans, I would. He had both legs off and didn't know it. Both legs, and he was on the deck. You see, the decks were all running with water. The fire pumps going, you see, open-ended fire pumps. And the water was flowing all over the deck, and he laid on the deck, you see. So I went along, and in the light of the fires that were burning on the upper deck, we had cordite fires. We had 7 or 8 cordite fires on the upper deck, you see, all of them, and the fire parties attending to them. But with the light of that, I could see my little messenger fella. He was a member of Searchlight's crew, you know, and he had both legs shut off, and he'd fallen down from the Searchlight platform onto the deck. And so he said, "Hello, Chief." "What are you doing down there?" I looked, I saw he had no legs. I said, "Come here, let me have a go at a hypodermic syringe up here, you see. There's the only thing we could do for first aid, you know." I took my jacket off. I never saw my jacket off. Rolled my jacket up and put his head on my jacket. And I tore his sleeve, cut his sleeve up here with a penknife and cut his skin off and gave him a good pump of this cocaine stuff, whatever it was. And said, "Righto," and they lay there quiet when they were coming along pick up prisoner. So he said, "My foot hurts me." I said, "Yes, that's all right. They'll look after the foot. I'll send somebody up to look after your foot." He had no legs at all. Do you know, he sat up then and he looked and he saw he had no legs. What do you think he did? We had no safety chains on, you know. He rolled himself over and over until he rolled himself over the side. God, I can't tell you what I felt about that. He was the biggest little thief you ever struck.
And in the darkness and the confusion, the German fleet slipped round Jellicoe's rear ships and headed back to the safety of their protective minefields.
As the North Sea had been cleared of enemy ships, there was nothing more to be done, and the British fleet set course for its bases. In the forenoon of the 1st of June, all ships held a funeral service for those who had given their lives in the battle. Beatty, deeply moved, stood on the poop behind Chatfield, while 99 bodies of the flagship's company were committed to the deep in the traditional manner of seamen.
But it was a lamentable business because it wasn't a victory. We lost as many ships and more men than the Germans did. It's true that the German High Sea Fleet never came out again as such, but it wasn't a victory in the sense that Trafalgar was a victory, or Matapan was a victory in latter days. I don't think. And on top of it not being a clear-cut victory, it was badly handled by the Admiralty. The Clest people at the Admiralty didn't attempt to make anything good of it. They put out the worst statement. There were better news came afterwards, where they should have kept their mouths shut till they knew the whole picture.
In the afternoon, Beatty came into the Lion's chart house, tired and depressed. Unable to hide his disappointment at the result of the battle, he repeated in a weary voice, "There's something wrong with our ships." Then opening his eyes and looking at me, he added, "And something wrong with our system." Having thus unburdened himself, he fell asleep.
The Germans were no duds. Their ships seemed to want such a lot of sinking. You know, the Bluchers, they had to fire and they turned upside down, then she didn't sink. It took a hell of a lot of sinking. They did sail at Port once. They said air shells were striking fast enough, but they didn't seem to have the explosive power that the German shells had.
Of the gallantry shown, it is difficult to write with proper restraint. Whenever and wherever there was opportunity, officers and men displayed courage and self-sacrifice of the highest order. The dead died heroic deaths. The wounded behaved with marvelous fortitude. 44 years passed in the service had given me unbounded faith in and admiration for the British officer and blue jacket. But they surpassed all my expectations.
But there was a widespread national sense of disappointment and even anger, and controversy has gone on about Jutland from that day to this. But strategically, in the widest context, Jellicoe surely got his priorities right. The British fleet was left master of the battlefield. The German fleet retreated back to port, unable to challenge their supremacy. Jellicoe did not lose the war in an afternoon. Indeed, in that sense, he won it. What he did lose was the Navy's legendary reputation for invincibility. But in all fairness, the Navy's professionals had always been more soberly realistic about that than the patriotic literary men and music hall baritones. The nets of the North Sea trawlers gave a truer seafarer's image of the reality of naval glory for those who paid the price of it.
After that was over, mind you. But I didn't say 140 mile east northeast from the Naval. That was on the southern edge of the bloody minefield, you see. Well, the fat bloody haul we had there, we got 3 dead sailors, and there was bloody hammocks, dead sailors. We had a tie handkerchief round the mouth and snout, and we got shovels, 2 on us, you know, and the pieces about what kept breaking off, we was chucking them over the bloody side. And the bloody stench even turned the bloody metal in the bloody galley green.
It is strange, perhaps, to talk of so terrible and titanic an event as an anticlimax. Yet it was. The first great battle of steel battleship fleets misfired, and there was never a second one. And for the ordinary naval rating, the sailor, its sound and fury were probably, and ironically, a less important part of history than the ebb and flow of small, everyday experience.
Do you know, I never heard anybody mention it. I never heard the subject brought up. It's just went, it came and it went, and you carried on with life. I suppose, well, I don't know, I suppose it just, what I'd like to say is they just carried on the same as usual, and same as politics. It don't matter who got in power, nobody care less, sort of stuff. They got their own life. It's all they were interested in is their life, you see, and going to shore and having a drink and girls and that sort of thing.
The only victory which we did win was the German fleet never came out anymore. From my point of view, with all these shells flying around, I was scared, I can tell you. I was very glad to get back into harbour, but one game of football ashore, I'd forgotten all about it.
Jutland, programme 23 in the series The British Seafarer, was composed and produced by Michael Mason in collaboration with Peter Nailor, Professor of History, Royal Naval College, Greenwich. The readers were Michael Shannon, Leonard Maguire and Anthony Hall. Oral history recordings were from the sound archives of the BBC, the Department of Sound Records Imperial War Museum, the Henry Bainham Collection and the Trevor Lummis Collection, by courtesy of the University of Essex. Special sound was by Dick Mills, BBC Radiophonic Workshop. This series has been produced in collaboration with the National Maritime Museum. Radio 4. The British Seafarer, a history in 26 parts. Programme 24, The Battle of the Atlantic, 1939 to 1945. Presented in the voices of some of those involved in it.
That is the anti-submarine alarm. The crew are pouring out of the companionway and making their way to their gun station. There goes a rocket to light up the scene. And now I can see the crew climbing up to the gun platform, putting on their tin hats as they go, and them gathering around the gun, loading up the shell, and aft of me too, voices are shouting orders as they get the Lewis guns ready for action. I can see the dim lights in the bridge, and they're silhouetted against the smoke from the funnel is a dark figure of the gunner, and that was the fourth opening fire on the gun platform in the bow. It was fired a star shell. There goes the light of the star shell lighting up the sky. And that was a second star shell. And There goes the Lewis gun now. Red tracer bullets pouring out into the night. There goes the .5 gun. .5 gun in the stern, and this little ship is fully in action.
The Battle of the Atlantic must be won in a decisive manner. It must be won beyond all doubt.
Captain Martin said, he said, you know what an island is? I said, yes, sir. An island is a piece of land surrounded by water. He said, no! An island's a piece of land surrounded by bloody submarines.
The commentary is by the programme consultant, Campbell McMurray.
The Battle of the Atlantic lasted 5 long years. From the Allied viewpoint, it was being won when nothing much was happening. Its slow clock was the eerie ping of the Aztec, the submarine detector probing the underwater darkness for the U-boat's telltale echo. This battle, to bring Britain her vital supplies across a vast stormy ocean, infested with U-boats and bombers, was crucial. Without it, the other battles could not even be fought. It was conducted over thousands of square miles of sea. Its ship casualties were in thousands, its human casualties in tens of thousands. And yet...
that only about 1 in 10 convoys, Atlantic convoys, was attacked. 9/10 got through scot-free. I had a friend who spent the whole of the war on convoy escort in the Atlantic, and he never saw a U-boat. There are lots of misconceptions, which are very easy, because, of course, it's very impressive if an oil tanker blows up and 6 ships are sunk in one night. But think of the 600 which are not.
Its opening scenes were set against the grey backdrop of the Depression.
Oh, yes, that was 1938, just before the war. Things were very bad. Up here with the shipping, you could cross this river over ships laid up. There wasn't a berth vacant in this river, right from the entrance to the bridges, all laid up.
Basically, I mean, they were the nation's key men. But in the 1930s, you wouldn't have thought so. When we went into the little office there to sort of see if there were any ships coming, any jobs, you know, a tuppence halfpenny clerk would come to the window and look at half a dozen of us stand there. And, you know, what do you want? Well, you know, oh, don't think because you've got a master's ticket you're going to come in here and get all the ships, and down slammed the window.
Well, I went into Lambert's office and asked him if there's any chances of a chief steward's berth, you know. No, he says, look, he said, I've got all those names if I wanted a chief steward. Today, he said, I've got all those names of fellas.
So, you know, they lived through those periods. The sea was all they knew. They just had to hang around until they could get a job going to sea. And then comes the war. Well, of course, things changed dramatically. Then they wanted men. And quite honestly, I think all is amounted to that. Now, I wouldn't say it was an exaggerated idea of patriotism. It was just the ships were there, the jobs were there. So they went back to sea.
Well, of course, there was a few seamen who backed out, like, well, you couldn't blame them, but the thing was that we said, oh, well, to hell with it. We're not going to be scared, I suppose. There was nothing bravado about the seamen themselves. When that Kingsbury was going down, I was on deck. There was a chap called Jones from Cardiff and a fellow called Larry. And they were arguing about what they would do when they got on Poverty Corner in Cardiff. That's the corner near the shipping office where the fellows beg fags and so on.
Now, later on it changed, yes. Once the torpedoing started, then the British seaman got his back up and said, who does Hitler think he is to wipe us off the sea and things? And so, all right, he was torpedoed on a Friday, and the following Monday or Tuesday he was back in another ship.
And all it was a bang! And there's a deck above me, you see. There's only a hole about that wide in the deck, and there's an iron ladder when I hear this bang, the water up the hill, the ship is gone. And next thing I know, I see the funnel of the ship. I said, praise God, I said. And I hear what the fireman down below, I hear him shout. But the engineers, none of them, I hear them. But the only body I hear shout was the fireman that was down on below in the stokehole.
And there weren't a lot of survivors from engine rooms that could say what it was like.
But anyhow, I says, oh God, have mercy on me. Christ, have mercy on me. And the next thing I know, I was going down like this, spinning like I did. And I was going and going and going. And I couldn't drown. I said, oh God, why can't I drown? And I shoot straight back up the top.
But to start off with, it was the idea that you could get back to sea and be in work and things like that.
Within the experience of the Battle of the Atlantic itself, there were two secondary conflicts, important to the understanding of the quality and pattern of that experience. The first was part of the bird's-eye view of the battle, which saw it with the comparative detachment of a wide perspective.
The convoy itself there on the smooth water, it's so smooth that it looks, well, it looks rather like a harrowed field with sort of streaks across it. And the ships themselves cutting V's away behind them slowly as they are going. And there's a heavy pall of smoke from two of the ships whose funnels seem to be pouring out black smoke, and that smoke lying quite still on the water.
Roberts ran this anti-submarine school at Derby House, which was attended by captains of ships, first lieutenants of ships, captains of aircraft, and which played games on the tactical table representing U-boats attacking convoys. Roberts gave the whole of the Western Approach command teams a common policy, which was of tremendous importance. He did a great deal to win the Battle of the Atlantic, and I had a tremendous admiration for him.
We had a large floor area on which we had a convoy and an escort group represented by model ships, and each officer on the course worked on a plotting table like he would have in his own ship's plot. So when the game starts, they're told that we're going to work in 2-minute moves, and they must tell their Wren plotter what the course and speed of their own ship is to be for that 2 minutes. And at the end of the 2-minute period, the ships are in their new position, and then the chaps can look through an eyepiece, and the eyepiece was set so that they could see around their actual ship what they would actually see at sea. We would also give them ranges and bearings of anything they would pick up on their radar or their ASDIC. They would get that and be told, you've got an ASDIC echo bearing so-and-so, such and such a distance away. And then in the next 2 minutes, they've got to work out what they're going to do about it. And the girls got to know quite a lot about what they were doing. I think looking back on it now, the thing that was lacking in us was the realization of what it was really like at sea. At that time, I was very young, quite beyond my experience.
Initially, at this level of tactics and policy, the conflict was, strangely, still about convoys as such. The First World War had shown that ships in convoy, statistically speaking, were much less likely to be sunk than ships sailing independently. But by the beginning of the Second World War, that lesson had been largely forgotten or ignored, and the cost was to be high.
Most extraordinary things happened. The government tried to avoid going to convoy, and they would sail ships halfway around the world to finish up at the Cape of Good Hope, where the U-boats were, where they were sunk.
I was blown out in my bunk. 2 torpedoes struck us. The bosun was in the bunk below me. I never saw him, whether he was killed in his bed or what, I'm sure I don't know. I never saw him anymore. And I gathered myself together and dashed out onto deck. Couldn't see anything but steam. The ship had broken into two parts. Part of it had already gone, taking the majority of the crew with it, and a chance to get out of the beds. It only took 90 seconds. There's only one thing, to go over the side, hit the water, with a nasty splash, and come up and looked up and I could see the propellers still turning and the ship taking a last plunge down.
The second conflict was part of that sailor's eye view.
Occasionally one got very afraid if it was a really rough night. We had one convoy down to Gibraltar, and out of 21 ships, we lost 14 of them, plus 2 escorts. At times like that, you're really sweating afraid. When you come off watch, you just don't go below because clang, there's a torpedo waiting for you.
There wasn't one of us without a prayer for those poor blighters in the burning ship. Convoys make you selfish. The ship next to yours may go up, and you're sorry for the poor devils in her, but it's your own old sub that matters. Sometimes you may hate the sight of her dirty hull. Getting her into port is your one aim in life.
Whatever the statistics prove, the single ship feels like a needle for the U-boat to find in the haystack of the ocean. If you are hit, you alone see it, and may not survive to alarm anyone else. Whereas a convoy feels like one huge sitting duck, and everyone can see all the horrors.
In the very early days, you see, your convoy system was fairly scant. We had a couple of these old 3-funnel W-class destroyers that, if the weather was very bad, they disappeared for about 5 minutes at a time underwater. And although the convoys were scanty, or at least the escorts were scanty, I suppose in those days we were glad to get out of convoy. I suppose you felt safer on your own then, you see.
I think the captains of the merchant ships hated being in convoy. I don't blame them.
There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 German dive bombers, Junkers 87s. There's one going down on its target now. Bomb. No, missed the ships. There are about 10 ships in the convoy, but he hasn't hit a single one. And here they come. They come in absolute steep dive, and you can see their bombs actually leave the machines and come into the water. Oh, here's one coming down now. There's one coming down in flames. Somebody's hit a German, and he's coming down completely out of control, a long streak of smoke. The pilot's bailed out by parachute. He's a Junkers 87, and he's going slap into the sea, and there he goes, smash!
All our shipping statistics, the whole of that war, anything which had sailed in convoy and was subsequently sunk was shown as being sunk in convoy, not ex-convoy. And this falsified clearly all our shipping statistics, because those ships should have been added into the number of independent ships sunk and sailed to get the loss rate of independent ships.
Once the fall of France had brought German submarines and aircraft to the Biscay ports, the Battle of the Atlantic was on with a vengeance, and with it, the continuing conflict about the principle of convoy.
By going into convoy, I am taking a particularly unpleasant, offensive measure, unpleasant to the enemy, because he is going to find himself opposed by a concentration of warships at the very time he wants to give his total attention to the merchant ships. And my warships don't want to waste their time looking for him, because if the enemy is going to come and attack the merchant ships, he's got to find our warships, because by definition, they are there.
Well, it's very impressive. The first sight you get of it, you're impressed by the columns of ships. Then you get a bit closer and you see if the sea's very rough, you see these things rolling or pitching up and down, and my God, you feel so sorry for these chaps on board, because we knew what could happen to them. And they were only going, probably steaming at about 6.5, 7 knots, sitting ducks really. And, we felt, my God, thank God we're not down there. And we'd think of these
chaps, sort of steaming along in the middle of the Atlantic, just waiting for a damn great explosion. It virtually came nearly every night to one or two of the ships in the convoy, maybe more.
At midnight on the 17th, we were cleaning fires, and there was a bump, and the fires came out to meet us. The engine room was awash. The torpedo must have hit the ship somewhere between the bridge and the forecastle for it. There was no hope for it. So Evans and me went on deck. One of the lifeboats, the one on the port side, was hanging up cockeyed, which is a job for to get it fixed. The boat was overcrowded with men. As we pulled off, eventually, when the skipper, the wireless operator, and the deckhand took to a raft up above, I believe, the deckhand got drowned when the raft hit the water. There were ships getting sunk in all quarters. We managed to get picked up by a rescue ship, the Zanalak. They were taking a hell of a chance because there was a number of submarines still operating, sinking ships. And eventually the Zanalak was packed with survivors.
Medically or surgically, obviously you could find anything, but their psychological condition was an indication of the morale at the moment of it happening, particularly where the ship had been still fighting. The ship sunk by bombing, and their anti-aircraft guns have been in action. These are men whose blood's still up. We used to say, in fact, we used to almost tick them off when we got a bunch of survivors. That's a stroppy, that's a chocker. And the chockers, all they wanted to do was sit in the corner and die.
In convoy, it was very boring. Your helm was just a couple of spokes either side, just following a ship in front of you. You can't follow a ship and keep dead behind her. Not at slow speeds like that. You'd be watching your head and it'd be pitching and rolling and gradually passing the ship in front of you from one side to the other, and then she'd wallow back to the other side, and that's how you'd go.
It is only the odd spots of hectic excitement, lasting perhaps a few hours, that keep the small ships going. Life at sea for those in destroyers and corvettes engaged in escorting convoys across the Western Ocean means day after day of monotony in vile weather, rain, hail, and intervals of fog or ice. It may depend on a few minutes' action whether we get the chance of a kill or not.
The submarine surfaced back ahead of us. He must have seen us because he started to submerge again. However, by that time, we were in a perfect position to ram, and we came hard aport. We hit the submarine just above the conning tower, at a dead right angle, and we reared up about 10 feet in the air. We sat on him for what seemed quite a time. He broke in half. Stern parts passing down our port side, the forward end passing clear to starboard. The depth charge crews report they could have touched the stern, as it loomed up about 8 feet over their heads. We really were very busy.
The Admiralty, in the meantime, have got hold of the services, fortunately, of Professor Blackett, who started life as a midshipman and then became a great operational research scientist. Finally came to the Admiralty at the end of 42 and began to analyze the losses with his team. Ultimately, they came up with the fact that the critical factors was the size and numbers of convoy at sea in a given area. He showed that the larger a convoy, the safer were the ships in it. Now, this was absolutely contrary to Air Ministry and Admiralty doctrine. So he said, well, the larger the convoy we have, the better. And the Admiralty said, but we can't have a large convoy because every time you double the size of the convoy, you double its problem of defending it. He said, oh, not at all. Because you see, you're talking about the perimeter, because you don't protect the individual ships in a convoy, you protect the perimeter. Let's simplify it into terms of a circle. Now, the area of a circle increases the square of the radius, whereas the circumference is directly proportional. So, by doubling the size of the convoy, you increase the escort force by rather less than the square root. Oh, so what can we make of that? Well, at the present moment, you have got something like 12 convoys at sea of an average size of 30 to 40 ships. Now, why don't you have 6 convoys at sea of an average size of about 100 ships? You have double the enemy's problem of finding you. You're going to have a surplus of escorts because you've more than halved the number of escorts needed. What can you do with that surplus? Well, we've analyzed it. Your escorts groups form into the very efficient and not so efficient. You can take those not efficient ones, train them up the efficiency of the first-class ones. Now, if you do that, your shipping losses will be reduced by about 48%.
Well, 2 days out, we ran into the worst weather I've ever experienced in all my years at sea. Our old packet ploughed and rolled and made such heavy going of it that we never thought she'd get to port. The lifeboats were washed away, then the deck houses, the rafts, and finally part of the bridge went. A hatch was stove in, a lot of the cargo ruined. The skipper called us together. He said, "It's bad, and it's going to be worse. I'm going to pray to the Almighty, and I want you all to join with me."
One got a very good idea of how to run a ship in bad weather in the North Atlantic, which is probably the worst weather in the world. It was the worst problem of the lot. It was far worse than the enemy. And the ships were lost, just sank under conditions of gales.
The likes of the poor little corvettes were made to suffer. Oh, heaven only knows those poor fellows what they suffered.
Corvettes rode as if that were the only thing they'd been invented for. They rode so much that not only was sleep impossible, but even normal things like cooking or making a cup of tea.
The merchant ships, of course, were reasonably close. The problems of station keeping at night were difficult, and there were many collisions.
That J. Pinkton Henderson that had the collision with that big tanker off of Cape Race, I counted 28 dead bodies on her. There was one person, he was either an engineer, one the engineman, and he was on the second landing on the grating. And he was just scorched black soot all over. But the rest you couldn't. Well, you may see a rib or something, or a leg or, a bone, but they're burnt right to nothing.
We had 2 sorts of ships that left the convoys voluntarily. The one was a straggler, who may have had engine trouble, and the romper, who had a greater speed than the convoy and who decided if the going was tough, he'd like to get away from the convoy. But every single romper I can think of was sunk within 6 hours of leaving the convoy, and in some cases without a single survivor.
At about 10 minutes to 10, I says to Jack, "I think I'll go and make a pot of tea, Jack, for the 2 of us, can of tea." And all of a sudden, I'd never seen an engine before in all my life do its best to leave the bed place. The skylights, those great big ones, to come right down the engine room. Bang. Well, now, Jack went and he eased the engine down, no word from the bridge. And the next top he'd have come in under the bunker. And how them fellas got out of the stoke, well, I don't know. The gratings come down on top of them. The 3 of them got up and they were on the deck. Me and this lad was the last into the boat. Michael Veers, an Irish lad, a gunner, leading gunner, he had an axe in his hand, and when I was going down the fall got tangled down below and they couldn't release it. And it was a heavy sea running, so he cut the fall and he turned me, lugged me head foremost between the boat and the ship. And I'm looking at her the same as I'm looking at that, and I clawing out from underneath the bottom, and she going away from me. And she was like a dying human being. Grunting, yes.
Signals were going up to ships not keeping station. But let's be perfectly honest, they were down to the gunnels with iron ore, and they were only about 7-knot ships to start with. And they were wallowing around, they were doing their best. But you know, there are all these snoozy signals. Oh.
I was called to a ship in the Channel once because she wasn't keeping station. She was a coal burner, and she made the excuse that her fireman went up to it. I went aboard this ship. There were two firemen. One was 60, the other was 62.
I wasn't sunk at all during the war. I was right through the war. But there was a lot of chaps who sunk 3 or 4 times, and they'd come back, have the survivors leave, and then back into a ship again and get the hammer again. But they just kept it on. It just didn't seem to bother them. Morale was fantastic.
Well, nothing seemed to be happening, so we were hanging about the gun, and suddenly somebody shouted she's surfacing. She came up astern about 3/4 to a mile away, so we immediately opened fire. We obtained about 2 or 3 hits in quick succession, and we saw the U-boat's crew then abandoning ship. By this time, every gun in the ship was firing at her. The captain then ordered ceasefire. Well, the U-boat gradually sank stern first, and then we went over to pick up survivors. Survivors seemed pretty dazed. The depth charges and gunfire shook them up in general. After a while, they seemed to settle down. They seemed a quite happy crowd. They were very pleased to get out of U-boats, and very pleased indeed to get out of the war. They were all about 20 years old.
There was a chap called Clayton. He was on a tanker which was torpedoed, and the sea caught fire, and he had to dive through it and swim under the burning oil.
These men overtaken by burning oil were so slow to die, and they screamed so much, because on the whole, people died quietly. The groans and the curses and whatnot, and screaming was not a common thing in wartime. Screaming was always disguised as cursing. It always came out as foul language, perhaps in the end delivered as a scream.
You'd get a signal from the Commodore that we were going to do a few hours of zigzag, and it used to be good, really, because it used to break up the monotony of just standing there steering and following the ship in front of you all the time. And you see all the ships, they're heading one way, and then they all turn together. It's quite a sight, really.
Now we can see some tracer bullets going up on the port side here. Yes, flashes. Looks as if he's coming back or after the convoy. Just getting up some more shells. The men here were just as keen as mustard against this light. He's around. You can't say where because there's quite a lot of cloud about. You catch that remark? The extraordinary thing is completely, well, of course these fellows are used to it. This is just probably a nightly occurrence for them. Nothing out of the ordinary. They just get on with their jobs and man their guns and fire them. But that's all there is to it. Nothing unusual.
Greenwich would arrange a patrol line of some 20 U-boats, which would stretch on the north and south line, a patrol line. And they would be so spaced that it would be impossible for a convoy to get through the patrol line unless it was very, very thick weather indeed. And the first U-boat to sight or hear the convoy would report on radio to Dönitz, and Dönitz would give its position, course and speed. And the 20 boats would then concentrate and attack. And of course it was in this first period it was important to try and break up the concentration.
That was the beginning of a running battle which lasted 4 nights and days. On the Monday, the shocks of depth charges were thudding against our hull all evening. It was pitch black, and our blackout was perfect, but the northern lights betrayed us. They may look pretty, but to us there were evil blue fingers reaching out for us. The enemy had our ships in silhouette against them. Near midnight, the alarm shrilled through the ship. hadn't ceased ringing when I reached the deck, but already the first flames were licking up from a ship on the south side of the convoy. In a matter of minutes, she was ablaze fore and aft. Desperately, we tried to get out of the glare of that burning ship. She seemed to cling to us. The enemy had a single U-boat within striking range to the northward. Every ship was a target. But although we stood cursing at bar-loaded guns in the freezing cold, waiting for the hammer, that's what we call a torpedo, that blaze helped us too. You see, it blinded the whole U-boat back to the south. Around me in the dark, I could hear the gun's crew talking. Poor beggars, not a ruddy chance. The ship's burning oil was a mile-long curtain of flame over the water. Sparks shot hundreds of yards across the convoy as their anti-aircraft magazines exploded. All this time, the escort were depth-charging the U-boat to the south.
Our ship shuddered time and again as many depth charges exploded beneath the surface. A few minutes later came the moment for which we had waited long months. The U-boat serviced astern of us, breaking water at an angle of 60 degrees. When we were about 500 yards off, the U-boat seemed suddenly to stand on end with about 100 feet of her forward part vertical. We then saw one salvo from B gun smack straight into her. I gave the order, cease fire, as she sank slowly below the surface.
If you analyze shipping losses in the First World War from submarine attack, you find that there were only 5 ships which were sunk in convoy by submarines when there was an aircraft present. Now, come to the Second World War. The number of ships sunk by the U-boats is 2,500. 24 ships are sunk in that war, less than 1%, when there was an aircraft present.
In the first year of my experience in the Atlantic, which was 41, the contribution of the aircraft was good, but there was an air gap in which no aircraft could cover. Well, they had these old Whitleys and Wellingtons and the Hudson, which was a new aircraft, but not very long range. And they simply couldn't reach a large gap in the middle of the Atlantic, which the U-boats could roam about in without any fear of sighting from the air.
It was a Focke-Wulf Condor, painted sea green as camouflage. 400 yards away, I was wondering who would fire first. And at that moment, the Jerry and I both fired at once. I brought my Hudson to the lower and got into a position about 200 yards away to give my rear gunner a chance. I could see the tracer bullets from his tail gun whipping into the Focke-Wulf's 2 port engines and into its fuselage about mid-wing. We got closer still. Actually, to about 20 or 30 feet. So close, in fact, the Focke-Wulf looked like a house.
I'd got a captain and a first mate in the ship who'd had a lot of experience in the North Atlantic. And there were certain technical things that became second nature. Just as with me, I knew that if a ship had been mined, I was going to find a lot of broken ankles and legs and so on. If she'd been machine gunned, the head injuries and chest and upper limb and so on, you got your clinical instinct. Now, they said that with merchant ships, they rarely abandoned ship to command. They abandoned ship at a moment of panic. They were either too soon or too late. But when you're told to abandon ship, the last thing that crosses your mind is that the ship is still moving and may move for a further mile at some speed. And if anybody goes and lowers the rafts too soon, they're miles behind.
We lost our ship in that particular convoy sailing out of St. John's, Newfoundland. And this U-boat pack followed us practically all the way over to England, and we were about the 7th or 8th ship to go. There was just a big bang, and that was it. I rushed out on deck. The ship still had way on it. The ship's engines hadn't been stopped, and there was some panic among the crew attempting to launch a boat before the ship had stopped, with the result that boat was overturned and 4 crew members were drowned.
Unless there was more discipline than they were trained for, it didn't really happen frightfully well.
Yes, there was a certain amount of panic on that particular ship.
But you can get survivors from a ship that's been doing perhaps 10 or 12 knots when she's been hit. Survivors spread over half a mile of sea. And of course, in the dark. This is where the seamanship of these small shipmen was so good that they would almost subconsciously calculate which way the surface drift was because of the wind, and start at the tail end and gather them up as they came.
The very long-range Liberator had a very good range. It was a marvellous engine we had. It was a Pratt & Whitney 1863 engine. And you can get the RPM down on the engines. When we got onto convoy duty, we used to pull the RPM back to 1,500. You could actually see the propeller going round.
The air crews varied in ability enormously. And it was only when Chief Marshal Schlesser became the Commander-in-Chief of Coastal Command that the standard training in Coastal Command was brought up to a high level, and the results were instantaneous.
The one who really charged us all up was Schlesser in the critical period. He was a great man.
I would stress my opinion that the aircraft was the secret of success in the Battle of the Atlantic, whether it was an aircraft of Coastal Command or an aircraft from an escort carrier. Whenever an aircraft was with a convoy, the U-boats found it extremely difficult.
You would see ships disappear at a distance. You would see ships on fire. One trip coming back in, I think, 43, I think there was almost 50% of the convoy didn't make it back to England from Halifax. And for a short period then, ships were going down right and left every 6 hours. And that was a bad feeling.
What we saw was an oil pneumonitis. They got an oil pneumonia from breathing in. But they were not, in fact, drowning in oil. It was from getting a mouthful and then having a gasp and breathing and whatnot. So they coughed and vomited and retched and whatnot.
He suffered with his lungs because his lungs were full of oil as well.
It was remarkably unpleasant, that fuel oil smell. I can smell it now, just as I can smell burning flesh, a thing that you never forget all your life. It's not a nightmare, it's a thing that you recognize and deal with.
That night there was quite a big attack by at least a dozen U-boats. We sighted a U-boat before dusk, and I knew something was up. And I tried to place the escorts in the best possible way, which wasn't very successful, I'm afraid. And we lost 3 ships that night. They went on all the night. And one submarine got in the middle of the convoy. And in the tail, we had a battle. He got inside our turning circle. And we were unable to ram him. And it was very difficult to shoot at him because he was so close. And eventually he died. And we, I think, we put a depth charge back very close indeed. And at dawn, a U-boat came in from ahead, and the Tays operator, the textbook coming in. Just before we were firing depth charges, the submarine must have heard us coming, because he crashed dive, and he put a little bit of his stern out of the water. I can still remember seeing a little bit of his stern as he crashed dive.
We arrived over the convoy just as it was beginning to get light. The visibility wasn't too good. There was a sort of half-light, and a hailstorm didn't improve things. I started my patrol by making a wide sweep round the convoy, and almost at once we struck lucky. Astern of the ships and on the Liberator's port beam, I spotted a sub traveling fast on the surface, going all out to catch up to the convoy. Just as we dived on it, the submarine began to go down in a hurry. I didn't see what happened after the depth charges were dropped. My navigator told me they straddled the sub and hit it in showers of spray. When we got around again, there was nothing to be seen of it, but there was a great patch of oil about 800 yards long. and in the middle of the oil there was a lot of debris, little yellow pieces of wood. A corvette from the convoy came across and poked around, and before the corvette left to go back to the convoy, it signaled parts of dead bodies seen.
We're now mixed up in, I think I'm right in saying, the first attack on a convoy which has been actually recorded at sea. We've been attacked by bombers. There have been 2 runs over the convoy as yet. All the ships have been just blazing off like mad. They dropped a stick of bombs, but so far no damage has been done. I've taken up a position by the gun in the stern. It's a 12-pounder, and I'm right amidst the gun crew now. There are shells all around me too, and more are being handed up from the magazine below. I expect you can hear the crew. And wait a minute. Here he comes. He's on our port quarter, not much more than 500 feet up, I should say, and just about abreast of us now. There are tracer bullets bursting all around him. He's crossing astern, straight over, but you can still follow him through this night cloud. And there go his bombs. There are 6 or 4 of them. They're hanging in the air for a moment. I can see them distinctly, and now they're dropping down over the convoy. But wait a minute, he's missed. Columns of water sprouting up, but he's missed. The ships are still there, and it looks as if we're all right. There's just a faint smell of gunpowder and smoke drifting across the water, but we won't worry about that. He's missed, and everything's okay. The trouble is, the difficulty is not to get in the way. There are just shell cases all around, but well, I'm doing my best. It probably seems rather an odd thing to say, but, you know, this really is a beautiful sight. It's not quite dark. There's only a slight swell on, not much wind, and sea and sky are grey. Then immediately astern are the black shapes of merchant ships following us. I can see the Commodore, that's the one the Dornier was after just now. She's one of the largest and the senior merchant ship in the convoy. And there go the guns again, over on our starboard quarter this time. You can see the tracers sticking up like so many orange seeds of fire. And, you know, when that Dornier was over just now, I noticed his vivid green tracer bullets. They were zipping down as he set off his machine gun.
It's all right to say we shot down so many of their aircraft. We don't want to shoot down their aircraft. We want to get through without being bothered. We didn't go out to sea looking for U-boats. We hope to miss them.
Now, the survivor doesn't like being below decks. There's no doubt about it. So he's got to be lured or propelled below and so on. Now, I knew later on, when I was a survivor, that one of the things you feel straight away is that these people who've picked you up, they haven't had it, they don't know.
It became increasingly obvious to Brother Dreadnought that in the face of our mounting air offensive, his U-boat's mobility was being destroyed. Once a U-boat is forced to submerge, its speed is so reduced that it virtually gets nowhere slowly. And no sooner would it surface than down it would have to go again in the face of another aircraft. Accordingly, U-boats were ordered to remain on the surface and fight it out. This was just what we had been praying for. The air crews had a real field day. Altogether, in the summer months, U-boat sinkings were so heavy that no service, however fanatical or however strong their loyalty to their Führer, could stand the pace. And in August, the U-boats reverted to their old game of getting under damn quickly whenever they sighted an aircraft. In fact, Coastal Command had achieved its first real victory in the Battle of the Atlantic.
The Atlantic, programme 24 in the series The British Seafarer, was composed and directed by Michael Mason, in collaboration with Campbell McMurray, Assistant Keeper, Department of Printed Books and Manuscripts, National Maritime Museum. The oral history and field recordings out of which it was made were drawn from the sound archives of the BBC and the National Maritime Museum, in collaboration with which this series has been produced. The 25th programme, Super Carrier, will be broadcast at 10:15 on Sunday evening, June the 14th.